Alright, this video is to illustrate what happens to a type 2 diabetic when they are in crisis. So, of course, the first thing that happens is a bunch of glucose shows up here. So glucose shows up in the bloodstream, and followed by glucose, we have some insulin, of course, that shows up too. And the point of the insulin, of course, is to get the glucose into the cell. Now, with a type 2 diabetic, they have insulin resistance, and so they are, some of the insulin can dock onto the cell and allow some of the glucose in, but not all of it can dock. And so we don't get enough glucose inside the cell, but there's enough to produce some ATP. And so what happens is those cells are starving, and so therefore they call for more glucose. They call for more nutrients, and so you get hungry again, so you eat and you get more glucose that shows up, and of course then we get some more insulin that shows up along with it, but still very little actually is able to dock and allow the cell to receive the glucose that it needs. Now there's enough that it doesn't go into ketosis and produce the ketone bodies that the type 1 diabetics do. But what happens there is, because of the increased amount of the molecules here that are present of the glucose, this increases the density of the blood, so the amount of solutes that are dissolved in the plasma. And so this leads to an increased here, an increase in plasma osmolality. So we go a increase here in plasma osmolality. And so that is one of the hallmarks here of the type 2 diabetic in crisis. Of course, they have high insulin, they have an increased glucose, so again, a greatly elevated glucose, and the high plasma osmolality, which is actually simply reflective of a dehydration process that is going on. So, and it's dehydration because simply the increased amount of solutes dissolved here into the blood, but also because one of the things that the body does to help get rid of this excess glucose is try to flush it out the kidney. And so, of course, as it flushes it out the kidney, it loses further fluid. So, big hallmark here is of type 2 diabetes is dehydration, which then of course then affects your electrolytes, but that's for another video. And so dehydration, increased plasma osmolality, and greatly increased plasma glucose. There is another name for this, and it's called HHS. So HHS, it's a symbol, and that stands for hyperosmolar hyperglycemic state, also sometimes known as hyperosmolar hyperglycemic non-ketotic state. So that's either name can be used for that, but that is what happens in a type 2 diabetic that is in crisis, which is much different than what happens for a type 1 diabetic.